more than happy to do a Zoom support session.
Dr. Deidre Johnson, and I did not see her. Oh, there you are. Great. Dr. Johnson's going to talk to us about learning services, do some stuff around APA and writing. So she's going to be with us for the next hour.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's good to see your faces and names here in this Zoom orientation. I know everybody still may be a little burned out on Zoom, but maybe you're also valuing that you didn't have to make a special trip to campus today to make this happen and fight off all the students that are moving in now for the first time. So this is definitely preferable than trying to get around the move-in crowd. But my name is Deidre Johnson, and I work over in the Center for Academic Achievement here at ETSU, and we're a place that can help you and hopefully make your life a little less stressful while you're here as a student, particularly with our help in the area of writing. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an intro to kind of the APA style of writing, give you some academic writing tips really geared towards graduate students and the most common errors and mistakes and challenges we hear about that from faculty. And then I will let you know about all the free help that you have with your writing here through the center. So as I get my PowerPoint keyed up to go, my screen shared, I'm going to ask you to think about a question, and then I'm going to ask you to put that in the chat, whatever your answer is to that. And the question I want you to think about, I just want one word from you, and that word is, how do you feel about academic writing? So be thinking about that. How does writing for college, writing for graduate school, doing these APA style research and kind of journal article type papers, how does that make you feel? And it's perfectly fine no matter how you feel about it. I like to use this to kind of clear the air and set the stage for some of the things we're going to talk about. So feel free to pop that in there. Oh, we have a trend already emerging from the people in the chat box. So feel free to keep doing that as I get my screen shared. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of trends here in the comments. A lot of people feeling not so great about academic writing, and that's okay. I think that is perfectly normal and perfectly acceptable, especially for a field where you are people facing. You got into your jobs because you like to help people. You want to be immersed in these health situations, improving people's quality of lives. And it makes sense that the things that make you really good at that type of work are not necessarily the things that make you love doing an academic style research, writing paper. So I appreciate you all sharing some of that in there. Sometimes it's good to know that, hey, you know, I'm not the only one here who maybe doesn't love this, and that's all right. I like to come at this type of presentation by letting you know I'm also I'm not an English professor. I don't have degrees in literature and language. And I will tell you that, you know, writing is not my favorite activity either, which is a pretty unpopular opinion for a writing center director. So don't tell the English department on me, okay? But I do have a lot of experience in working with students to improve their writing. And I like to come at it from a very practical approach of, what do I need to do to be effective at this skill, to be able to check all those boxes, to give my professors what they want so I can communicate clearly, and hopefully coming at it from that different approach will help it feel a lot more manageable for you, and also help you see that we don't have to have PhDs in English to be able to write at the graduate level. We can take all of our skills and things that we're good at and be able to take all of that and use it to our advantage in the classroom setting. So with that, I'm going to ask you one more question and hopefully somebody can help me out. Do you all see the presenter view or the slide view on my slides? I have two screens and I can't tell which one you all can see.
It's showing the presenter view.
Thank you so much. So I do know how to fix it once I know what you all can see. There we go. I swapped it around. So excellent. Okay. Well, let's hop right in. We'll get the most fun stuff out of the way first, and that has to do with APA style, because we all love rules and regulations and having to try to follow those. So let's get that out of the way first. So with the 7th edition of APA style, I like to start it out with talking about just the basic elements of an APA style paper. And the APA manual kind of prescribes some minimum elements of what you have to have in a student paper. Now, we have APA requirements, and then we have our professor requirements, which oftentimes overlap, but may not line up exactly. So I always encourage students, make sure you're really looking through your professor's instructions, if they give you example assignments, because sometimes they will say APA, but they want some changes to APA style, or they want their version or some extra things that you might miss if you're only looking in the APA handbook. Okay. So in general, some of the things you can expect your APA style papers to have is a title page, some page numbers, a text, an actual body of your paper, and then a reference list. So that's just 4 things. That's not too terrible. I think we can manage those, and we're going to look at some examples of what those look like in the APA style. So you'll see throughout this presentation, I have some screenshots straight from the APA 7th edition manual. I always like to go straight to the source to get this so we know we're going by accurate info. If you have an APA style manual, that's great. If you don't have one, all that information is out there on the Purdue OWL website, on the APA style blog. So you don't necessarily have to purchase that if you don't have it already. You can find that information. Just make sure that you verify that you're looking at the most up-to-date info. Okay, so on my screen here, I have an example title page for an APA style paper. If anyone's been out of school for a few years and maybe been affected by a changeover in editions from the 6th to 7th edition, or maybe the 3rd or 4th to the 7th edition, nothing wrong with that. This is based on the 7th edition of APA style, the most recent version. So if you see any differences, this might be where they're coming from. We might be working from a more recent edition than what you're most used to. So on the title page for an APA style paper, you're going to start with a page number. You're going to have the title of your paper bolded there on the very top. And you'll notice all the elements that we have here on this title page are kind of centered in the top quarter of that paper. So it's all up in the top section of that sheet of paper. You're going to have your name there as the author. For your affiliation, you can put your department, the program that you're in. Then you're going to have your course, your instructor, and the due date for the paper. So some of this is just practical information, so your instructor knows where to put the grade for which course, for which student they're in. And it might also help you if you go back to look for your paper later, you'll know where to find that based on what course you were in at the time, or even by searching for the program that you were in. So that's why we have all those pieces of information there on the title page. So once we have the title page, that's when we start getting into the body of our paper, the actual writing. And generally in APA style, you're going to see some common trends through here. So the big picture pieces of APA style tell you to put your title on the first line of that paper. It's going to be bold, it's going to be centered, and you're going to capitalize it using the title case, where you capitalize all the main words in that title. APA style also allows you to use several different types of font in your paper. If you'll notice, there's kind of a trend here. They are all pretty clear, easy to read. They're not very fancy. Calibri, good old Times New Roman, Arial, but there are different sizes for each of those fonts depending which one you use. I do see most professors still asking for things in Times New Roman. Nothing wrong with that. It's been kind of the standard for a while. The APA does permit you to use a different style should you want to get wild and crazy and pick something outside of the box, if your professor says that's okay. The next big trend throughout the body of your paper that you can expect is that the text in that paper is going to be left aligned and double spaced. That sounds pretty simple and straightforward. We're used to writing with things left aligned and turning in papers that are double spaced. But if you write your papers in Microsoft Word, which I know a lot of us do, Microsoft Word will automatically add in some extra spacing. Anytime you hit enter to make a new paragraph or to put in a heading or something in your paper, Word is going to add in some extra space. And I have seen nursing professors count off points for people having that extra space in their papers. So there's an easy way to fix that. If you're very forward thinking, when you start in your paper and start setting it up, you can tell it in the line spacing options to not add any extra space. But I never think that far ahead. So what I do is once I've written my paper, I like to just highlight the entire thing, go to that line spacing in the top ribbon and tell it to remove that extra space in between paragraphs. So that'll get rid of that. It'll keep everything nice and neatly double spaced, and you won't have to worry about losing any points because of Microsoft Word adding in that extra space for you. The next thing is you want to make sure that the first line of each paragraph that you write should be indented, and you should do that by pressing the tab key, not by hitting the space bar a lot of times. I see a lot of students, even at the graduate level, still using the space bar to make those indentations, but that means they get kind of wonky and they're not all even. So make sure you indent by pressing the tab key to indent over. Another very controversial topic as far as writing formatting goes, and sometimes I'll ask this if we were in a classroom, I would say, okay, how many of you put two spaces after a period that ends a sentence? And how many of you do one space? And it's almost always divided in half, depending on what people were taught to do, where they went to school at, a lot of different things. But now APA style says for us to just put one space after a period that ends a sentence instead of two. And that was a change from the most recent edition that said drafts are supposed to have two spaces after a period. So just something to be mindful of if you're one of those two spacers after a period, which I was previously. I've had to retrain myself to just hit one space after a period that ends a sentence. So those are the big picture things that sometimes cause you to lose points, not based on any of your writing, just needing to follow those APA guidelines really closely. Another aspect of APA formatting that we do often see give students a little bit of trouble is using headings inside their paper. So headings, I think, are a very nice tool for you to have as a writer. Headings can actually help you keep your paper organized. I would ask, let's do this. Let's have a quick talk about it. When you work a puzzle, for any of you that have worked a jigsaw puzzle before, what part of the puzzle do you do first? And there's no right or wrong answer to this. So feel free to unmute yourself or go to the chat if you have an answer. If you're working a puzzle, what part do you do first? All right. Corners and edges, corners and edges, borders, corners and edges. Yeah, absolutely. And why? Why do we do the edge first? It's easy. It's easy to find those pieces, right? They've got one flat side easiest to get done first, then just fill in the space. That's exactly what I was looking for, Reagan. Absolutely. It gives you a shape, it gives you an outline, and it gives you spaces to fill in. So when I think about using headings within my paper, you can use your headings to help give yourself that outline for your paper. So then all you have to do is fill in the space, which I think is a really wonderful thing. Much better than having to stare at a blank page, a blinking cursor. And you can take your assignment instructions, whatever your professor has given you, and you can turn the things that he or she has asked for into headings in your paper. So that serves two purposes. It gives you that outline for you to go back and fill in. And then the second purpose is it makes it then very easy for your professor to easily check off and say, oh, okay, great. They did every single thing I asked for in my instructions. So that's how I like to use headings. I like to use them as that border, that edge to my puzzle. So then I've got my outline of my paper. I just have to go and fill back in the pieces. And I find that a lot more approachable, a lot easier to tackle than trying to write my paper from word one all the way through until the end. So thank you all for sharing your puzzle experience as well. I appreciate that. So as far as how you format your headings in APA style, you'll see an example here. So APA has 5 different levels of headings that it prescribes, and we start with level 1, and then every level after level 1 is a smaller piece of the section before it. So these don't go numerically. You don't go heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, and change the format every time. Instead, all the big sections of your paper will have, maybe a level 1 heading, or depending if level 1 is your title, then a bunch of level 2 headings. So an example in a research article that you might read would maybe the title is your level 1 heading, then maybe you'll have a section on participants, methodology, and results, and those are all level 2 headings. But then under your methodology section, maybe you've got a level 3 heading where you talk about the different sampling techniques that you use to select your population and your sample for your study. And then maybe you break that section using a level 4 heading into an even smaller section where you describe the characteristics of each of those samples that you took. So each section is a smaller piece of the number before it, and they're all nice and bold now, so they're easy to see. They stand out from your paper. That level 1, like I said, is just like your title. Oh, yes, and someone shared, here's a good YouTube video on how to create the references section for a PowerPoint presentation. I love YouTube, especially for trying to figure out how to get software and things to do the things you want it to do. So thank you for sharing that, Quentin. I appreciate it. There's all kinds of great tools out there to help you with some of these processes. So with these levels of heading, level 1 is centered and bold. And then when you start writing, the text begins on a new paragraph, indented over. Level 2 is just like a level 1, except it's left aligned. So you got your center for level 1, level 2 is left aligned. Then you'll see as we go down, level 3 then is italicized, level 4 is then indented, and it ends with a period. So you'll see after level 4, we will start our text right after that period, right after that heading. So it doesn't get its own line. It's actually the first piece of the paragraph that we're writing there. So the level 4 is bold, ends with a period, and level 5, much like the level 2 and 3 before it, is then italicized and indented. So just some processes there. Mostly what we see with headings is that people just tend to forget what level they're supposed to be using. So that's a good thing to go back and check your paper for before you submit it, just to make sure that this is still in the same place, still a subsection, as we move things around in some of these longer and larger papers that you'll be writing in grad school. Okay. So now I want to kind of hit the highlights of citations. I know a lot of times when we're thinking about a format that we have to write in, we're thinking about citations and reference lists for sure. So I have some examples here of basically how to cite things in APA style. The nice thing about APA style, as far as in-text citations go, is that it's fairly straightforward. They tend to use the author and year format, which is nice. So as long as you're paraphrasing something, just citing a fact and not using a quote, not using word for word the same information, all you need to put in to cite that information is the author and the year of publication. So I've got an example there for one author. We've got the author's last name, comma, then the year of publication. We've got two authors, then we've got three or more authors, then we have a group author and a group author without an abbreviation. So one thing I'd like to draw your attention to, because it's a very common mistake with citations, is that for those two author sources, so that Salas and D'Agostino example, if you'll notice, the parenthetical citation, which just means a citation that's in parentheses at the end of a sentence, in that parenthetical citation, when we have two authors, we're using the and symbol, the ampersand. When we're inside the parentheses, we want to make sure we use that symbol. But if you look at that narrative citation right beside it, and a narrative citation is if we want to work those authors' names into our sentence as part of our sentence. So according to Salas and D'Agostino, then we put the year in parentheses for our citation. You'll see that and is spelled out. So I do see students mess that up quite frequently, using the symbol inside the parentheses and spelling out the word and if it's part of their actual sentence in their paper. So just something to be mindful of. On the third line there with three or more authors, you'll see that APA has really simplified how to cite multiple authors. Thank goodness. That was kind of a tricky part for a lot of people. So for three or more authors, all you have to do is use that lead author's last name and then put et al. So for these in-text citations in the body of your paper, you just need the lead author and then et al. So you'll notice this et al, even though, oops, I clicked a button, even though it is a Latin phrase, we're not going to italicize it. It's ET space AL period. And I do see that period go into weird places. Sometimes people put a period after et, or sometimes they forget the comma after all. But that's the habit you want to get into. ET space AL period comma. Martin et al. Comma, and then the year. Same thing if you do that inside the text of your paper, Martin et al. And et al is just a Latin phrase that stands for pretty much and the rest of them, Martin and the rest of the authors. So that's how you cite three or more. I do see a lot of nursing students, anybody in the health sciences really, use that fourth example of a group author with abbreviations. I mean, there's so many health institutes, there's so many different organizations that you might want to cite as a good source for your paper. And this shows how you can do that. This is also the same way that you would introduce an organization or an acronym in the body of your paper, even if it wasn't a citation. So all that you need to do is the first time you spell it out, and then you put the abbreviation in parentheses beside it. And then after you've introduced it and introduced that abbreviation, then after that, you can just use the abbreviation, which saves you a lot of space, makes it much easier to actually read your paper without all those long, lengthy citations in there. So the only place that gets a little tricky for students is if you're using a parenthetical citation for one of those group authors, you'll see that inside those parentheses, we've got it spelled out, National Institute of Mental Health, and then we're going to use brackets for the abbreviation because we're inside of those parentheses. So brackets inside the parentheses. But if you use it as a narrative citation as part of your sentence, then you can just spell it out and put the abbreviation inside your citation there with the year. So just a little tricky thing there. And if you have a group author with no abbreviation, like Stanford University, you just treat it just like it was an author's name. You just spell it out the full way every time. You can use it in the parentheses or as part of the sentence, if that might be the subject of your sentence. So, okay. Any questions so far about citations? I know it's riveting stuff, you all, especially when you're not writing a paper and don't have something you're trying to cite in front of you. So hopefully this is just kind of priming you for what to expect. And I'll share these slides out so you can refer to them as you do get into your courses and may want to look back on how to cite something. Okay, we're almost there. So the next thing that I want to touch on is direct quotes. So I told you the really nice thing about APA style is that, if you're paraphrasing something, putting it in your own words, you just have to have the author and the year. So that's very simple, very straightforward. But sometimes you are going to want to use direct quotes. In general, in APA style, and your professor may give you a number or a percentage of your paper that, maybe your paper shouldn't be more than 15% of direct quotes. But in general, APA style really prefers you to paraphrase and put things in your own words and to only use direct quotations or word for word the same thing as your sources when you need to. And there are reasons, especially in the nursing field, why you might want to do that. So maybe you have a specific definition of something that you don't want to change the words to. Maybe you've got a section of the American Health Care Act and you want to keep that verbatim exactly what it says. Or maybe there's diagnostic criteria for a particular disease or disorder, and you can't paraphrase diagnostic criteria. So those are examples of when a direct quote might be a good thing for you to use. And the only difference between a direct quote and something that you've paraphrased is if you are using word for word the same thing as your sources, you want to make sure to add a page number into your citation. Because if we're using the exact same words as that source, we want your professor to be able to go to that source and know exactly where to flip to in that source so they could look that quote up themselves. So there's an example there of how that looks inside a parenthetical citation. Author's last name, Smith, the year, 1999, and we found that quote on page 9. Now, some of your sources may not have page numbers. With a lot of things being online, that's a little iffy. So what you want to do in the case that your source doesn't have page numbers is you can either indicate the heading or section that something's in, or you can count paragraph numbers if that makes sense. I see paragraph numbers most frequently, especially for if it's in a source that's, less than probably 20 pages. But if you're in a very long text, you don't want to be counting 352 paragraphs in. So it might make sense to say results section, paragraph 7 instead. So just put enough information there so your reader, your professor can find where that quote is at. And in direct quotes, the only other oddity that you might run into is a block quote. And a block quote is considered a direct quote that is longer than 40 words. So if you have a block quote, and they are pretty rare to see in graduate level writing, but occasionally they do pop up, particularly sections of those healthcare acts and things like that you might need that full space to do. In that case, you're not actually going to put that direct quote inside of quotation marks. You're going to break it out into its own section. It's going to be an indented paragraph all by itself with no quotes. And you're going to introduce that quotation saying, according to the American Health Care Act, and then drop it in right below that. So then you can put your citation at the end of that quote after the period. That's probably the weirdest thing in APA style citation is citing a block quote and then having to put that citation at the end of the sentence after the period instead of inside the sentence like it typically is. So we got direct quotes, short quotes, block quotes. Pretty much you want to make sure you got a page number, section number, paragraph number so you can direct your reader to look back at that. And if you have a very long quote, you'll want to break it out into its own section. All right. Another piece that comes up in APA style writing is how to cite tables and figures. We know a lot of what we do as researchers, but also as clinicians and people in practice is we look at data, we look at tables, we look at figures, and sometimes those are things you want to pull into your paper as you're writing, because sometimes it's easier to communicate ideas visually than it is to try to type them out in a paragraph of information. So here's an example of a table and a figure in APA style. Again, this was an update in the most recent APA style version. Is now they really just have one format for both of these. And you'll see we've got the table is going to be table 1, figure 1, bold, left aligned. Then in italics, right below that, you're going to have the title of that table or figure. Then you're going to present your table and figure. And if you have any notes, because sometimes figures have notes with a further description, those would go under the table or figure. So pretty much that is how you present that type of information in the body of your paper. You'll see that the lines are a little funky in the tables. You can work these in using just the border feature. If you are making a table yourself, you can tell this to keep the bottom piece, keep the top, keep the bottom line, and underline the pieces that you want. Or there are different programs that will export that data in exactly the format that you need, just depending on what you're working on. So tables and figures, one format. They are just numbered in the order that they appear in your paper. So table 1 will be the first one, table 2 will be the second one, and you do count tables and figures separately. So if you have 3 tables and 2 figures, you won't go up to number 5. You'll have tables 1, 2, and 3, and then figures 1 and 2. So even though there's one format, just make sure you don't count those together, just in case. Okay. Now we're going to switch over a little bit into some things that are not just about formatting or citing, because APA also prescribes some standards for the type of language that we should use in the health sciences particularly. And one of their big driving initiatives is using inclusive and bias-free language. And this can be kind of tricky in some of the healthcare fields as you're trying to refer to specific populations. So I do have some general guidelines here. The first one being you want to make sure that you are being as specific as you can. And I've got some examples here. For example, mankind is not considered as accurate or as inclusive as people because it has the gender, it's got man right there in the front of it. So we don't want to accidentally exclude all women when we're trying to talk about everyone. So we're using very gender neutral language. There's a lot of ways that can come up. You're in healthcare in the nursing field. I'm sure you've read things that assume all nurses are female, and we know that might not be the case. But some common places I see this, policemen instead of, assuming that's men and women, firemen, statesmen, those are all have man in there and are not gender neutral. So you'll want to make sure that you're finding a term like firefighter that is gender neutral to kind of swap in place of that. The second piece has to do with kind of referring maybe to someone who has a condition or a disability. And typically what APA says to do is to use people first language, which means that we are going to do the person first when we're writing them out. So instead of saying a blind man, we're going to say a person who is blind, because people don't want to be defined by their condition or disabilities. They're a person first. Same thing as if we said poor patients. When we're really talking about maybe the income level of a group of people, we could instead say people whose income is below poverty level. So again, putting those conditions or even groups of people, making sure you're putting the person first when you're describing those groups. Another thing to kind of take care about is to avoid accidentally implying a hierarchy or that some things are better or worse than others. And I see this come up a lot with the word normal. I know we say normal a lot in everyday conversation, but maybe that's not exactly what we mean. Maybe you're talking about what you would say normal blood pressure. But instead, you could say average blood pressure or within the healthy blood pressure range, because we don't want to imply that people are abnormal if they don't fall in that, mean median mode type range. We don't want to stigmatize them in any way. So just take care about using the word normal particularly, but there may be other cases where that comes up. Then another factor that you want to consider is how you can reduce bias in your language. APA, an example of how APA does this, even within their citation style, is you'll notice when we cite authors within the text of our papers and even in the reference list, we never see authors' first names. It's always last names, first initials. And the reason is so we can reduce bias. We don't want people to make assumptions based on if that author is a male or a female. We want their work to be judged on its merits, not their gender or even nationality sometimes. So APA does have kind of a prescribed list of preferred terms for specific populations. So people with intellectual disabilities, people of particular age groups. And this language and the groups that, the terms that groups prefer to be referred to as is always evolving. We know, especially some of you who may have been practicing for a long time in hospitals and clinics, things are different now than they were 5 years ago, and they're very different than they were 10 years ago. So I would always recommend checking that APA manual or going to the APA blog to get the most up-to-date information, because even a phrase like the elderly, right, something that we generally probably don't have a lot of negative connotation with, is now not the most preferred term to refer to people over a certain age. So encourage you, take a look at that, especially if you're writing about, a specific population. And also just be aware that this newest edition of APA also endorses the use of the singular they. So we know we have a lot of talk about pronouns, he, she, they, them, and it's best when you don't know an individual's pronouns, what they prefer, to instead refer to them as they instead of the he/she. And if you've ever tried to write he/she, that's a pain to try to do and to try to keep up with. So even if you're talking about one person, patient A, you can use they to refer to their pronouns. So if their pronouns aren't known. So just some differences to kind of get used to, some things to check as you are writing about different populations, and kind of some phrases and things to be careful with and avoid, just so we can be as inclusive as possible and reduce bias in our readers. Okay, and last but not least, we have the reference list. So you already got a nice thing shared in the chat there about creating a reference list, and there's a lot of different ways to do this. I can promise you that during my several decades of work in higher ed and with working in a writing center and working with students on their theses and dissertation projects, I have seen every citation generating software out there. I have played around with them. I have wanted them to work. I have hoped that they would work. And I will say I have unfortunately not found anything that is as reliable as making it yourself, because most of those citation generators, even some of the nice programs that you pay for, if you don't enter the information formatted correctly, it's not going to spit it out for you formatted correctly. I'll also unfortunately tell you, while it is nice that the library websites, and that's not unique to us, this is libraries everywhere. When you pull up a source from the library, you can often click over and say, give me an APA citation for this, and it'll have that on a tab when you find your source. But I will say those are almost always incorrect. Sometimes for capitalization, sometimes the right things aren't italicized. So I would just encourage you, honestly, do this manually. When I write a paper and make a reference list, I'm talking even sizable papers like 75-page grant applications. I will make my reference list first as I make my outline with all my headings that I need to go back and fill in. And on my reference list, I will put the in-text citation right above it or below it. So then I can just copy and paste it in where I need it within my paper. And that way I have that made. I know it's done correctly. I don't have to worry about losing points for it. And it really doesn't take that much time once you know what you're doing. So just in general, I'm going to go over and show you an example reference list. But in general, you've got references in bold at the top of your page, just like one of those level 1 headings, just like the title. Your entries on your reference list are going to be alphabetized by the first thing in each of those entries. So for a lot of those, it's going to be a last name. But if you have a source without an author, it might be a word instead. And then it's going to have a hanging indent in it. And a hanging indent means that that first line is left aligned. It's scooted over to the left, but each line after that is indented over to the right. So I'll show you what that looks like on the next slide. But you're also going to make sure that all websites and all of your DOI numbers and things are going to be linked. That way your professor can click right on that and it will pull that source up for them. So that is a change from the 6th edition to the 7th edition. And here is what that looks like on an actual reference page. So references at the top, it's all alphabetized. You can see the hanging indent here. And if you didn't catch that on the last slide, the best way to do that if you're making this manually is to type it all in, all the pieces of your reference. And then when you get down to that next line, just hit Control Tab and that will indent that line in. Because I know how frustrating trying to format all this stuff can be. You'll also see that all those websites, the DOI numbers are linked, so they're clickable. And I promise that the grad school does go through and click every single one of these and make sure that they work as students work on their thesis, dissertation, and capstone projects. So it's a safe bet that those are going to be checked, which is one reason I like to do it myself to make sure it's right and that I'm not going to have anything broken or not working. But in general, that's kind of a highlight of what to expect as far as your APA style goes. I know it's not the most exciting information, but I do promise the more comfortable you get with it, the sooner you practice it and get a hang of it, it's going to make the rest of your time in grad school a lot smoother and a lot easier. So I'm going to hit the highlights, just some tips for your academic writing while you are a graduate student here. Academic writing is really more like technical writing. I like to think of it as it's almost like following a formula or following a template, which is refreshing in a lot of ways because that means, you know, I have something that I need to accomplish. I have a typical pattern that I can expect to follow. So you're not having to reinvent the wheel every single time that you write a paper. And we like to say it's not about creative writing. You know, we're not writing stories. We are instead using creative thinking to help connect all these theories, all this evidence, this research-based practice into a cohesive paper yourself. So that's where the creative thinking and connecting comes in. And it is really important. I know we talked about how writing makes us feel, and I wholeheartedly understand where everybody's coming from. But it is going to be important, in your career, after you get out of here, being able to communicate well and clearly in writing is going to be really important, especially if contributing to nursing education or research is in your future. It's also going to help you get a lot better grades in your classes. The sooner you can figure out how to get a handle on academic writing, the better the rest of your time here is going to be. And happy writing makes for happy instructors, because I promise if you take a few minutes to put yourself in your instructor's shoes and you've made all these instructions, you've made rubrics, you've talked about papers and talked about what you want in class, and then imagine sitting down with 25, 30, 50, 100, depending on how many sections they're teaching. Imagine sitting down with 100 papers that are all supposed to be kind of about the same thing, and then having to read all those. And maybe you start seeing patterns of things that aren't in there that you asked for. So understandably, that drives professors crazy. It takes a lot of time to grade and give feedback on writing. So that'll help make your professor happy if you're doing what they ask, and happy professors give higher grades. So I'm a firm believer in trying to make that happen as smoothly as possible. And, just like anything else, just like we make a first impression on someone when we first meet them, people make impressions of you based on your writing that may or may not be accurate. Usually not in my case, but it is what we look like. I do activities with a lot of undergrad students. I call it the bad essay activity, and I'll take in, a bad paper, and we'll work on correcting it. And I'll ask those students, 18-year-old freshmen, what do you think, about this writer? And they're harsh. These 18-year-olds are mean when they say they're lazy, they're dumb. They say horrible things about this writer. And if I ever have, older students or more experienced students, they sometimes say, well, maybe they wrote it at 3 a.m. and maybe they had to work all day the day before. But people do make assumptions, right, based on the surface information they can see. And we want our professors and our colleagues, we want them to make good, positive assumptions about us. And writing is one way we can improve our professionalism in that regard. So in general, the key core principles that we are hoping to get from you in graduate level writing is we want each of your papers to have a clear, unifying thesis that has supporting points that are supported by research, evidence-based, peer-reviewed articles. So using those good sources to kind of support those points and claims that you're making. We want this to be clearly organized. By the time you're in graduate school, your professors are expecting some pretty flawless formatting, I like to say. We want you to be able to follow instructions by the time you're in grad school. And I have to emphasize, for the field of nursing, you all know how important it is and how detail-oriented you have to be in your work and in your practice. And they want that same level of attention to detail in your writing as you do in the clinic when you're giving medication to someone. So really looking for that good, clear, concise, well-formatted, good vocabulary, exactly what we would want, from a graduate student types of writing. So in general, some things that you want to do and not do in your academic writing. So good graduate level writing is specific. You're always going to give a number and a percent. We don't want to do generalizations, but maybe we want to provide a context for those numbers to kind of demonstrate if something is significant. If anybody watches any type of news or media nowadays, we hear things being, statistics being misquoted, misrepresented all the time, every day. I don't care what channel you're watching, you're going to see some misrepresentation of facts and information. But in the academic world, we try not to do that. We try to be as honest with as much integrity as we possibly can. So, for example, if 25 subjects having a reaction, is that significant? In the news, we'd see that with flashing headlines, right? 25 subjects had a reaction to this vaccine. Heaven forbid I say the vaccination word in a room full of nurses, I know. But, well, maybe if only 30 people got that vaccine, yeah, that's huge. But what if 200,000 people had that vaccine? What if it was 2 million? So giving some context for your numbers, for your percents, that types of thing. We also want to avoid some general phrases that are very vague, particularly the phrase a lot, many, or most. Most nurses agree that vaccinations are important for people's health. So maybe that's true, but for graduate level academic writing, we want to know specifically how many. And if we don't know how many, then we probably shouldn't be making that claim to start out with. So that just makes sure we're accurate with what we're saying and we're being specific. We're also avoiding some of those phrases that are really easy to slip into writing, such as saying, analysis says, data says, research says, without any type of support. Now you can say, research shows that exercise is good for cardiovascular health, and then go on to cite several studies that show exactly what those benefits are. You also want to be careful about the phrases, maybe, probably, and likely. Just like, making those claims, we want to make sure that we have the data, we have the studies, we have the information to back those phrases up. So just being careful. And of course, referring you back to following those rules. When in doubt, do what the APA handbook says, but even more so than that, look back to your instructor's instructions that they gave you, because they're the one grading your paper, not the APA. So we want to make sure we're giving them what they want. And then last but not least, one of the biggest challenges I know for students is they work really hard on their papers, they write them, they get them together. We read it and it sounds like Shakespeare, right? It sounds great. We read things the way that we want them to be heard. We've worked so hard on it, we feel like it's good. But how many of you have ever went back and looked at a paper that you wrote maybe a year ago or when you were an undergrad? Were you happy with it when you went back and looked at it? Probably not. Most of us are like, oh no, I can't believe I did that, because we had some perspective. And with that different perspective, with that distance, we've got a new opinion, a fresh set of eyes. So one thing I really encourage everyone to do is to proofread your paper. And there's some strategies you can use for that. What people tend to do is they'll want to kind of skim through their paper, checking for any obvious errors, any big issues, missing commas, misspelled words, that type of thing. But really, and you may have noticed this already, your brain works against you when you try to proofread your own writing like that. It skips over repeated words. It puts in things that aren't actually there. So a better strategy you can use is to read that paper out loud. That will really force your eyes and your brain to say the words that are actually on the page. And our ears are really good detectives. So that will help you catch some things that are a little off, that might need to be rephrased or reworked a little bit. So reading out loud is a really good strategy. But the absolute best thing you can do is to have someone else read your paper, because they didn't write it. And it's really hard for you as the writer of your paper to switch out of that writing hat and immediately put on an editing hat to fix it. Like I said, your brain is working against you. So what I would really recommend is for you to take advantage of the free graduate level writing tutors we have over here in the CFAA. So we have half a dozen people who are postmaster's degree writing tutors from a variety of discipline. We actually work with a lot of nursing students, both at the master's and the doctoral level. And these folks will sit down with you either here on campus or online via Zoom. You can meet both ways, and they'll read through your writing. They'll help you get that second perspective, that second set of eyes, They're very knowledgeable about APA style and grammar rules, so they can help you fix things that you may not even be aware of. And sometimes what we see happen in a lot of our graduate level writing consultations is that, you know, our students ask more questions. Well, what does this sound like? Or does this make sense? Is this clear? So it's really a discussion. It helps you polish things up, and it really helps you strengthen your own writing skills so that you can become a better, more concise, clear writer by being more aware of those other perspectives. So again, that's a service that's completely free to you as an ETSU student. I know you are all busy. A lot of you are probably working in addition to trying to do your academic programs, and probably have a family and other types of life outside of ETSU as well. So we are open 7 days a week. We've got some evening and weekend times where you can come in and get help. And like I said, you can do it via Zoom. There's a lot of good help out there. So I'd really encourage you to take advantage of that. It's something that can reduce a lot of stress and also help you perform a lot better, help you learn and grow. So then you'll be a lot more confident, and you won't have to worry so much about getting sometimes scary feedback, you know, from your faculty members as well. So I've got our link there, but if you Google ETSU tutoring, we're the first thing that will come up. I'm also going to share these slides out so everybody will have access to this, because on the last slide, I've got some links to other resources that might be helpful for you as you get into writing as well. So, okay, I'm going to try to find my stop share button, and then I'll be able to see everybody again. There we go. All right. Any questions for me while I'm here that I can help answer?
I believe I did. There he is. So I'm going to let Dr. Croft talk to you guys about this exciting opportunity.
Thanks, Flo. Are we last?
Last but not least. And I see Dr. Williams has joined you.
Yes, ma'am. So I know everyone must be like in overload syndrome. So first, I just want to welcome you all to this program. Welcome to ETSU. If you're returning, welcome back. And we're going to spend just a couple of minutes. This is not a long process, to give you a little bit of orientation about interprofessional education opportunities at the university. And so with some kind of thumbs up or clapping of hands or some exuberant acknowledgement, can everyone see the slide that's being projected?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. It's so nice to hear a human voice at this point in the day. So thank you. Well, my name is Brian Cross. I'm a pharmacist by training. Have spent the last 30 years or so in primary care settings mostly, and in settings where team-based care was sort of the standard of the process. And it's from that history that a lot of our IPE stuff at the university was formed. But so first, I just wanted to give you guys an idea of who we are. So about a year ago, there was a retreat for interprofessional education, and we left with a new mission, a new vision, and a new set of core value statements. So I will not read this, but I just want to kind of let you know that this is our foundation. This is the mindset from which we begin, and we hold these ideas and concepts very important. So I think we're going to lay this out in a very simple kind of way. So we're just going to answer questions like why, who, what, where, when kind of things. I think at this point of the day, that may be the best way to go about this. So first of all, why IPE? I just want to give you a very brief history process. So in 2001, the United States government put a report out called Crossing the Quality Chasm, and this will not come as a shock to anyone in the audience. It said that our healthcare system needed some overhauls, and the two major themes that came out of this report was that when we are training, that we should be training together, and when we are practicing, we should practice together. There were hundreds of pages in this report, but if you boil it down, those were the two things that they said. Move forward 15 years. So about 5-6 years ago, there was a huge landmark study that came out in the Lancet from the folks at Johns Hopkins, and they showed that medical error, the major cause of medical error in this study being miscommunication, misunderstanding between team members, represented the number 3 reason for mortality in the United States. So just pause for a second and take that in. That means other than cardiovascular disease and oncology, the healthcare system itself is the most efficient thing at killing patients. That should cause everyone to pause for just a second and realize that we are sending you upon graduation into a health system that is currently broken.
Excuse me, would everyone please mute their phones? Anthony J.
Sorry.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
thank you.
It's okay. Thank you. So that's kind of the mindset that we enter into why we do what we do here at the university. There was a very great TED Talk from Simon Sinek several years ago that spoke to organizations being able to speak to the why, not the what and the how. And I just want to leave you with some numbers that are taken directly from that study. So again, remember that medical error accounted for the number 3 reason for mortality. If you put numbers around that, what that looks like is 4 727 airplanes dropping out of the sky every day, every week, every month, every year. That is the same as 250,000 people dying in our healthcare system from preventable reasons from medical error. So we have work to do. What that study also suggested was that if we did a better job of communicating, if we did a better job of working together, that these preventable deaths could quite likely be reduced by 50%. A couple other things I just want to draw to your attention. So there have been now at least 5 Cochrane reviews showing that there was a value in students and learners and people that were in practice, that were engaged in an interprofessional manner. So I won't read it, but here are all of the good things that have been shown in at least 2 different Cochrane reviews. The last reason, and the reason that you all don't want to hear, is that accreditation standards are significantly changing in the last 5 years. And we are seeing a growing amount of requirements and recommendations for our learners in all 5 of the colleges at ETSU to be engaged in some formal, intentional process of interprofessional education. So what is IPE? I just have a slide here for you. There are a multitude of different definitions from different organizations. The one I want to draw your attention is from the World Health Organization, and this speaks specifically to learners. So that's you guys. And it's when 2 or more folks from 2 or more different professions learn with, from, and about each other, and hopefully improve outcomes of the patients in result. Other things that are less highlighted here is just the idea of interprofessional collaborative practice, teamwork, and team-based care, all of which are sort of derived from this initial discussion of interprofessional education. So that brings us to the core domains that we will be working through in interprofessional education here and in other places. The 4 domains are there in the middle: interprofessional communication, roles and responsibility, values and ethics, and teams and teamwork. In 2016, this was updated and specifically focused on or increased focus on patient outcomes, population health, and preventive medicine. So looking at health as more of a population, or at least as a population related issue. The other thing that we saw in the updated report was a ton more institutional members and professional organizations joining this group in 2016. And so with that, I'm going to, I don't think I missed anything. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Williams, who will do a much better job than I, going through sort of the nuts and bolts of the things that we want you guys to know about with our program here at ETSU.
Thanks, Dr. Cross. I am Dr. Alicia Williams. My background and training is in psychology, and I worked in community health for a long time before coming to ETSU and earning my doctorate in education. And that's how I come to work in interprofessional education. Have worked in team-based care and wouldn't want to work in any other model after I've done that. So I share a passion for interprofessional work. So what I want to share with you is specifically how IPE meets the interprofessional education training for our graduate level nursing students. For both DNP students and MSN students, we have an asynchronous IPE program where all of your learning experiences do occur asynchronously. There's no required in-person attendance. There are some optional in-person meetings that I'll share with you about in a few moments. Each module is delivered over a 2-week time period. There are 2 modules in the fall and 2 modules in the spring. You do have to pass all 4 of those modules in order to have successfully completed interprofessional education. During these modules, there are interactive experiences that take place asynchronously. So you can imagine that's a bit of a challenge, but we have faculty members from all 3 colleges that are involved who facilitate small learning groups. You will be working along with other students from 2 other colleges, as well as standardized patients or standardized professionals. And a lot of this learning occurs through discussion boards, or there's the possibility of you collaborating if everyone in your group agrees through a Zoom meeting or that sort of thing. But again, that's optional. Everything that's required occurs through the discussion boards. For our DNP students, this is a required experience. It has been for, I think this is the 2nd year now that it's been required, although we have had DNP students enrolled since the 1st year pilot, which was now 4 years ago. For our and for the DNP students, you can earn up to 40 hours. So that's 10 hours per module of residency hours. And again, you have to complete all 4 modules across the 2 semesters to earn those 40 hours. For the MSN students, this is the 1st year that we have offered this to our MSN students. It will be required in the future. This year, we are highly recommending it. Your college is highly recommending it because, as Dr. Cross just explained, this is best practice now, and we want to help you be prepared to leave ETSU ready to work as a high-functioning member of a great interprofessional team. So because it's not required this year, we do have a cap on the number of students that we can accept from the MSN program. And that cap is at 50 students for this year. So that's 50 in the fall and then up to 50 again from the cohort that will be entering in the spring, we can accept. So kind of a first come, first served basis. So you want to enroll quickly if this is something that you decide to do. We'll move to the next slide, please. Okay, so what or when is IPE? As I just mentioned, it is an entirely asynchronous experience. You see the course number there for the fall is 5727, and in the spring it'll be 6727. You have the CRN number listed there, 85282. You will need that number to be able to enroll for IPE this fall. We also have the module dates listed there for you so that you can kind of prepare and plan ahead of time. The first module runs from September 18th to October 3rd, and then the second module from October 16th to the 31st. And you'll have 2 modules in the spring semester as well. The advantage for you completing this is it will show up on your transcript, and we do know that employers are increasingly looking for potential employees who have had training in team-based care. So we need you to enroll quickly. This is so that we can get you assigned to interprofessional teams. We need you to enroll no later than August the 29th, preferably like if you can leave here today and go sign on to a Gold Link and get enrolled today, that would be great. All of the experiences are pass fail, and you are assessed on professionalism, knowledge, and IPE skill by your faculty facilitator that is facilitating your small group. Okay, so how is IPE done for our graduate nursing program? You participate in the asynchronous model. So it is all online courses. And as I already mentioned, you'll be interacting with team members from 2 other colleges and 1 faculty facilitator, either from nursing, public health, or clinical and rehab sciences, who will facilitate discussions on the discussion board. You will also have the opportunity to interact with a standardized patient or standardized professional during many of these activities. And as I mentioned, there's no required in-person classes or meetings in order to complete this course. And who do I learn with? I think I just mentioned, I kind of gave it away. Sorry, Dr. Cross. But you will be participating alongside, in addition to nursing students, students from the colleges of clinical and rehabilitative health sciences and also public health. And I think I saw some questions maybe in the chat. See if I can get to.
Dr. Williams, I can field the questions.
Yeah, thank you.
The first question was what was the cost?
So this course does not cost you anything. It is a 0 credit seminar. So like I said, it will show up on your transcript, but it is a pass-fail experience and it is no extra cost to you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. The second question is this course required? Do we take it once throughout earning our degree? And the second question, so go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, so it depends. If you are a DNP student, then the course is required as part of your residency hours. If you are an MSN student, it is not required at this time, but like I said, it's highly recommended for various reasons that we had already talked about. Do you just take it once throughout earning your degree? Yes. So it's my understanding that this is going to be open to MSN students only during their first and second semester of study. This is so that you can complete this before, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Wirebach, but before you are entering your clinical experiences. Is that correct?
That was the discussion that the faculty had, that we felt that it would be best for the MSN students to take it before they entered that arena. It'll be a nice bridge, I think, for them going for many of our MSN students are in acute care settings. There'll be a nice bridge for them.
And so then it looks like the other question, will this be offered in the future? And it will be offered, we'll be offering this every year. However, unless something changes, it sounds like for the MSN students, this is going to be offered for your first and second semesters of study.
Right. So I just want to carry that over into the DNP. So for our DNP students, the DNP students have been doing the IPE courses offerings during their residency courses. And they do count for 10 hours per successful completion of the module for a total then of 40 hours. And we have found that this has been a great opportunity for students to have a different learning experience while they're in their residency courses and having it count for residency hours. So is it offered every semester? Can you answer that? And how do I register?
So Dr. Cross, can you go back to the slide that has the CRN numbers?
Absolutely. Maybe. Here we go.
Okay. So there is your, there we go. There is your CRN number, 85282. If you search for that course, you should be able to find it relatively easy. The course number for fall is IPE 5727. And the name of it is actually year one. I can't remember the specific name. Do you remember, Brian? It's asynchronous interprofessional seminar. Is that the way it's labeled? I think
Seminar 1 and Seminar 2. Yeah.
So the fall is Seminar 1 and the spring would be Seminar 2.
Yes, technically, but for those students who are entering in the spring, it would be their first. And to just sort of answer a couple of questions, maybe a better way to think of this for your guys' training is that this is a sequence of learning. There are 2 semesters total. Because of the nature that it is foundational, it's important that if you, from an MSN student perspective, if this is something that you're interested in, it really would be something you'll need to register for this semester. I do want to, so I hear, like, so I teach in a multitude of different colleges. I know that there is at this time where you're sort of trying to figure out your schedule and am I going to be overwhelmed? I think that this is not the kind of thing that's going to add a ton of work and pressure to your current existing process of learning. What our goal is that you have an interactive nature, though online and though asynchronous, with a group of learners that are coming at this from a different angle. And I think I've worked with a ton of advanced practice nurses, nurse practitioners over the years, and I really appreciate being on teams with them. I think it's really important for you guys to sort of have that ability to get this training before we head out onto rotation and sort of head into that world that we were talking about at the beginning, that if we can just agree, it's a bit flawed these days, our healthcare system. So
Thank you. The next question is, For DNPs, is it required to take one semester or each semester? So for the DNP, it's required to take both semesters. There are 2 modules in the offerings modules that's being used interchangeably in the fall, and then another 2 in the spring, with each module / offering being 10 hours. So you have 20 hours of residency in the fall and 20 hours of residency in the spring. And I would also echo what Dr. Cross was saying. I've been a faculty facilitator numerous times. And I find that, yes, this takes time, but I do not find that students are overwhelmed with it, is what I find. So the DNP, so Abby, it depends on where you're at in your DNP. If you are a BSN to DNP, you're going to be doing that later. If you're a postmaster's DNP, you're going to be doing it with your residency hours, because you need to get an additional 500 residency hours. That is over and above what your hours are for your clinical that are required before you go into your residency hours.
And I don't know if everyone saw it or not, but Dr. Cross put in the chat also that in addition to this showing up on your transcript and getting residency hours for DNP, both MSN and DNP students that complete both semesters of IPE will get a special cord to wear at graduation and also a certificate of completion. So this is probably a question for you, Dr. Wirebog. So when do the BSN DNP students need to register?
Right, and I am going to, I believe that Dr. Armstrong is still on. I have not been involved in
Yes,
this
I'm
part of
still
the
on.
conversation. I'm going to let you field that one, Dr. Armstrong.
When should they register?
No, when do the BSN DNP students need to do this?
Okay, the DNP students is required. We'll be teaching it this fall and in the spring. The MSN will not evolve probably until 23, the fall of 2023. So
Right,
they're not.
So for the students that are entering as BSN to DNP students, not the postmaster's DNP students.
I would say they should probably register this fall. If they can't take it in their workload this fall, then they need to take it in the spring. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that is one of our competencies, and that's one we need to move on with. So DNPs would register if they have the time for this fall. It's not a long, hard course, is what I understand. And so it should not take that long, and it will be behind them. It's probably the easier semester for the DNP to take it when they start 6801, I would think.
No. What he's asking is, I'm a BSN entering as a BSN student.
They're still going to a DNP role. They're still going to have to
Right.
So it's up to them. When do they want to fall? And if they can take it in the fall, that would be good. Or the spring. That would come with their advisor to help them set up that plan of study. But I would think the fall or the spring, they would need to take it. Because they're actually going to finish out in the DNP is what and so getting it done timely would be best.
Okay, and we can clarify that and get back with specifics for students on that.
Which student is interested? Well, I have several in the BSN going to DNP in this setting. So we can send that, if they'll send their names in, we can send that back. But I really think I'm a real advocate for the IPE, and the sooner we learn to work together, the better all of us will be.
Just to put things in perspective for the students. So notice that the modules, there are sort of 2 modules per semester. These modules run over a 2-week period of time, but think of this more as an interactive process, not a you're doing something every day for the 2 weeks. And we try to simulate as best we can what practice looks like out in the world when you have a team that is not co-located in the same space, in the same clinic, in the same ER, in the same ICU, etc. I've practiced with a good number of people over the years where you put something into the chart and then you wait for a day or so until some response is made. And that is the same kind of experience that is happening in these environments. Also recognizing that many of our learners are unique and shall we say adult like myself. And so you may have a whole bunch of pieces of your life that require you to engage IPE at particular times of the day. And so taking all of that into account that's why it requires a 2-week space of time in order to get these various learning objectives accomplished for you guys. So just to clarify for the question from Abby, so there are 2 modules per semester. The dates are on this slide as we're showing, and then there's a similar sort of time thing in the spring semester as well. So two modules, number 3 and 4, or 1 and 2, if you will, in the spring semester. Different course and different CRN numbers. So, and as Dr. Williams has put in the chat, the competencies that we are specifically focusing on in the fall are roles and responsibilities and values and ethics. And the 2 competencies and therefore the 2 modules we will be focusing on in the spring are specifically interprofessional communications and teams and teamwork.
And Dr. Cross, do I understand correctly that you need to take these in sequence and not broken up?
I'm seeing Dr. Williams' head shake. I'm going to let her answer that question, make sure that I don't misspeak. I believe so, yes.
Yes, so students that enter in the fall would take this the fall and spring in the same academic year. Students that enter in the spring would take it in the spring, the year that they enter, and then in the fall, the following academic year.
So this is with any of our BSN to DNP or our MSN students, correct?
It's my understanding that the DNP students take it fall and spring in the same academic year. And
Right.
then the MSN students are a little bit different simply because you have students that are admitted both semesters. So the idea is that they will be taking it the first 2 semesters of study. So if they come in the fall, they take it fall and spring in the same academic year. If the MS students come in the spring semester, then they take it the spring semester, the year they enter study, and then the fall semester in the following academic year.
Okay. So if we only teach it in the fall and the spring, then those entering in the spring will have to wait until the fall to take it, is what I understand.
They'll take the second semester in the fall. They would take the first semester in the spring and then the second semester in the fall.
Okay, so that's not sequenced. Okay. All right.
It is not intentional, if that is the question. So each semester is able to stand on its own. They are complementary and absolutely need the relationship of the other, but whether you begin in the fall or begin in the spring, you're not going to be getting a less than experience than someone else.
Okay. All right.
Okay, do we have other questions for Dr. Croft or Dr. Williams? Okay, well, you guys have been phenomenal today. You guys have hung in there. We have another jam-packed day tomorrow. I know that tomorrow we have the opportunity here from a national nurse